In 2019, James Harden had one of the most extraordinary offensive seasons the NBA had ever seen in the modern era. That year, it seemed like Harden was practically possessed when the ball was in his hands, scoring efficiently and frequently on offense for the Houston Rockets. The NBA records had to be rewritten almost every week due to the performance of the Beard. From becoming the scoring champion, leading the league in isolation points, to averaging 40 points per game for 40 games, the reigning MVP showcased that his offensive bag was limitless, to the point that many people like myself believe James Harden, though he didn't win the MVP award that year, had one of the most unreal offensive seasons in over the past 50 years. Allow me to set the scene. Coming off of winning the 2018 MVP award, James Harden and the Houston Rockets began the 2018-2019 campaign very slow. I'm talking about a very rough start, coming out of the gate with an 11-14 record. The Rockets were going to need a complete shift if they wanted to succeed in that season, and James Harden would eventually be the catalyst that turned around Houston's season that year. Through 78 games played, James Harden would average 36 points per game, run 6.5 rebounds, 7.5 assists per game, while having a 61.6 true shooting percentage. James Harden's points per game in 2019 was the most since Michael Jordan in the 1987 season, and currently sits at 7th all-time for points per game average in NBA history. We're talking about all-time great scoring productions that at the time, the closest player we've ever seen replicate that was Kobe Bryant in 2006. But Harden put up a scoring display from almost every area from the court with great efficiency as well. When comparing the greatest scoring seasons, you can see how efficient James Harden was in putting the ball in the basket compared to the rest of the field. From an efficiency standpoint, it's clear as day that Harden ranks among one of the best ever just at scoring in bunches and maintaining efficiency in 2019 and for the bettermost part of his career. But you're probably asking yourself, like defenses were in 2019, how is this guy scoring like this? What made James Harden so deadly in the half court for defenses to stop? Well, if you take a deep dive at the Beard's shot profile like I did, you'll uncover a lot of insane details. For one, head coach Mike D'Antoni for the Rockets' 5-out offense allowed James the ability to freely work in space and create defensive mismatches all over the court for himself and his teammates. Harden, surrounded by 3-point shooters, made the defense have to think of either playing 1v1 basketball with the best ISO player in the league, or sending help and allowing one of the best playmakers in the league find his guys open. Along with leading the league in scoring, Harden would lead the league in free throw attempts, getting to the basket by drawing contact with the defender that couldn't legally guard him. And I'd be lying if I said people enjoyed watching Harden bait NBA defenders into fouling him.
I just feel like, Ralph, this style, what Harden does is manipulating the game somehow, like almost like cheating it. I'm watching something that isn't basketball. Like
back then, I probably had the same opinion this announcer had on Harden's play style. But at the end of the day, it does take enormous skill to trick defenders into fouling you and getting to the foul line. And even if you dislike the play style and discredit Harden's ability to draw fouls, in 2019, his free throw points only accounted for 26% of Harden's point totals. You could remove James Harden's free throws and he would be 1.5 points back from still leading the league in scoring. Harden's usage rate in 2019 at 40.6% is currently the second highest all time behind Russell Westbrook in 2017, which allowed him to put up those amazing numbers he did that season. With the ball in his hands most of the time, isolation and drives to the basket were the bread and butter of Harden's offensive toolset. He wasn't just good at getting to the basket and mixing his defender to sleep. Harden was elite and proficiently sound in both areas of scoring. 87% of James Harden's buckets were unassisted, which meant Harden was able to get whatever he wanted, how he wanted, while still putting up 36 points per game. From an isolation standpoint, Harden led the league in isolation points per game with 18.1, which was more than half of his season average. The next highest player in isolation points per game was John Wall with 4.6. Harden would rank in the 92nd percentile in the league in isolation and would have the highest points per possession amongst all leaders in ISOs. Harden would also lead the league in pull-up jumpers with 14.5 points per game just from pull-ups, while also leading the league in pull-up three-pointers made a game with 4.4. Harden in isolation within Mike D'Antoni's system just made it impossible to guard him one-on-one without help. But once you try to play tight, Harden had the ability and quick first step to get by the defense and open up the drive, where Harden led the league in drives per game with 19.6, where he also led the league in points on drives with 14 points per game, and had the highest percentage of points per drive at 71.3%. Even if you were trying to limit the isolation play, Harden in his prime was the best driver in the league, and it opened up so much for the Rockets offense as well. Harden was 4th in assists on drives in Mike D'Antoni's system, like I mentioned, and it allowed the Rockets to make teams pay from 3. Houston would actually break the record for most three-pointers made in NBA history with 16.13 before the Utah Jazz would break that record in 2021. From the mid-range, Harden didn't take that many shots from that area. Only 2.4% of his points came from the mid-range, which makes you ponder, if James Harden had added the mid-range game to his arsenal that year, he could have possibly averaged 40 and done more damage in the half court. Now remember when I mentioned the Rockets started off the season 11-14? What James Harden would do in the next 40 games will probably never be done in the modern era of basketball again. Through 40 games, James Harden would average 40.1 points per game. 40. 4-0 for 40 games, as the Rockets would go 28-12 during that span. James Harden would up his averages in assists and rebounds per game, and his efficiency from the field and from three would increase as well. Look, averaging 40 points for a week is already something that we praise in today's game, but to average 40 points for 3 months in an NBA season is asinine to believe actually happened. From December 8th, 2018 to March 8th, 2019, James Harden was arguably the best offensive player the NBA had ever seen. As of right now, that is the second longest streak of games to average 40 points in an NBA season. And of course, Wilt is number one. Within that historic stretch, Harden would become 5th all-time in consecutive 40-point games, putting up 41, 45, 41, 43, and 44 that were all wins, 2nd all-time in consecutive 35-point games with 11 games, and will become 1st all-time in consecutive 30-point games with a 32-game streak. The second highest player is Kobe Bryant with 16 games. Harden would notch his career high with a 61-point performance in Madison Square Garden and would also have multiple back-to-back games of 50-plus point performances later in that season. Like I said before, you don't have to like the playstyle, but man, you cannot deny the greatness we witnessed in 2019 from James Harden. The Rockets started off slow, injuries to CP3, and they needed Harden to carry that team to be successful that season. And Harden didn't only improve following his MVP season, this guy put the team on his back and broke records we didn't think could be shattered, especially in today's era. Harden would finish 2nd in MVP voting, and the debate of if he deserved the MVP award in 2019 will always run rampant. Not because Giannis Antetokounmpo, who won the MVP award, didn't deserve it, but because James Harden was just that amazing that year. I can only think of Stephen Curry's 2016 MVP season that rivals Harden's 2019 season, that goes to show how great Harden was that year as we compare his season to Steph's MVP season that we hail as the greatest offensive year ever. All in all, James Harden in 2019 offensive display will go down in the record books as one of the most legendary offensive productions we've seen in basketball, and I don't think we'll ever see an offensive display of that magnitude in a very long time. What do you guys think? Where do you guys rank James Harden's 2019 season amongst the greatest scoring seasons ever? If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more hoops content. Be sure to turn that post notification bell on so you never miss a video. Until next time, stay on beat.